right, everybody, welcome back to the Insurance Nerds Attachment Point News Roundtable. I've got one of my good Insurtech runner buddy friends from across the pond, Gemma Whitehouse. Thanks for joining me.
Hello. Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course, of course. The pandemic brought like so many weird things, but one of the small silver linings was I kind of made a point to get outside every day. We had our Insurtech runners group, which we'll have to revive for like a quarterly check-in. But yeah, it got
Yeah,
us connected across the globe. That was awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having fun on Twitter and sharing some runs with us.
yeah, I'm pretty committed to getting back into the swing of things this year and gradually increasing my mileage. I
Yeah.
was living out in Norway for 8 years and running across the mountains quite regularly, and now I'm back in the UK and like fully kind of flat landscapes and shorter distances at the moment. So I need to build that back up. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
some of those Norway Strava pictures were amazing. That was the other cool thing too, just kind of seeing the scenery from, the East Coast, from Norway, from England, from Chris, all his hikes. It was really cool. But
yeah.
yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, for those who don't know, Gamma, fractional CFO based out of UK now, but just and actually working across the pond too, working with some friends over at Batomic as well, and just scaling. I think you said was one of your kind of major strengths that you offer to smaller startups.
Yeah, so I'm a consultant CTO day to day, and I work with a range of businesses. I'm currently on a fractional contract with Batomic, and it's a great opportunity to get to know them. They are a brilliant, really strong team, great proposition. They're in a great position to scale and evolve their proposition. So it's a really exciting time to be working with them as well. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity there. And it's also great for getting a bit more insight about the American market. I had a reasonably good kind of handle on in the insurance market generally, particularly across Scandinavia because I was living
Mm.
there for 8 years, but also across Europe and of course to a certain extent the UK. And now to just have a bit of insight into how what's the same, what's different, and some of the challenges that you guys have over there has been really interesting so far. So yeah, that's been very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about people viewing it from both sides of the pond.
Yeah.
I try to say that casually, the pond. When I talk to startups, I'm like, the US is big, you can take it kind of region by region, and the different regions have different carrier appetites, and that's where the use of data is going to be so powerful. It's just hard to broad brush over here, because of the dynamic landscape. And I'm sure that's the same for Europe. I'm sure even within England's got such a dense populace and such a rich history in insurance. And I think some of the things you folks are doing with tech too, you can kind of lend like a forward lens of what might happen over here in 10, 20 years as well. The broker
Yeah, I
market
mean,
versus kind of direct, it seems like. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think from my point of view, I think the kind of the innovation is fairly kind of well spread
Mm.
across the different regions. Like I see there's some really exciting, cool things happening in the US market, and you can sort of see pockets of that across Europe as well. I think I'm kind of lucky in being in the UK. I mean, that London's just always it's always been a sort of hub for fintech, right,
Hmm.
and for the financial services sector in general. So we should really be kind of leading, I guess, in insurtech in that sense. And in some ways we are because we've obviously got more funding available here. There's more talent easily available here. We're a big economy. Trying to find talent in Scandinavia in a small market, not so easy. It's a much slower process, and the market's of course that much smaller.
It's
So
funny.
yeah. Yeah, those sorts of dynamics which kind of, all contribute to that ecosystem and where those kind of regional hubs and that innovation kind of comes from as well. So,
And I feel funny trying to like compare the two, but you have LA, which is like a top two city in the US, and you have San Diego, which are top 10. And then we tried to do an InsurTech group in Orange County like 5 years ago, and just nobody showed up. It was like me and my buddy Ryan for 6 months, and that became Broker Brews. But yeah, sometimes when you're in like secondary, like populated places, but they don't necessarily have like the city buzz, it can be kind of interesting. So we're lucky to, find things like Twitter, like to network all over the world. It's pretty cool. It's gonna be interesting now that things are getting kind of slightly normalized, to see how these relationships that happened during COVID keep going. Um, and it's very interesting to think about innovating in a place like the London market or UK market because it's so rich and deep and it has so much knowledge that I feel like in the US, it's a little bit more of that screw it, let's do it. Richard Bronson, we'll just figure it out. And if we get in trouble, somebody will send us a letter and then we'll behave. Whereas there's a respect for how this has been done for 300 years over there. I feel like that sometimes, we can be a little bit bold in our rushing in, but I think there's a deep knowledge and, they seem like measured plays a little bit more. I might be overstating things, but it seems like my take a little bit. Or maybe I just see the more mature ones that have made it over here. Or,
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And it's partly because if you look across different regions, there's a lot more compliance, right, in different kind of sectors and areas. And also the risk appetite isn't the same. There's a much, I don't know, much less risk averse I mean, I know we're talking about the insurance sector, there's an irony in that statement, right? But in terms of having speculative capital that you can throw at business and having large amounts of speculative capital and a large market also you can test it out on your doorstep in the United States, which is not really the case in the European markets, of course, and this is also a challenge, and it's kind of interesting if you're looking in this sector and you're looking between the different markets. What will work in Norway or Denmark will not work in the UK in many scenarios. You have to do quite a high level of tailoring to actually kind of translate that same proposition because of the nature of compliance, because of the nature of the capital that you need, because of the nature of the market's interests and how you're actually selling in that product are just completely different. Yeah, so it can be it's quite interesting and quite challenging at the same time.
Oh yeah, and I would think there's a random book I listened to called The Hypomatics Edge, and it was about how all the crazy people come to the United States and also across the country and do other stuff. That like you have to be a little bit wild to come over here, and it's so funny sometimes because and not to bring it back to states too much, I apologize. I got a couple of things I want to bug you about, but how you sell in LA is different than how you'd sell in Texas, is different than how you'd sell in Wyoming and Florida. So it's so funny. It's one country. And I know you've been doing some work in behavioral data as well. And I know Batomic, it's just a big play, be more intelligent about what's going on in your agency, the agencies around you, the market in general, kind of owning and tracking your data. Have there been any cool unlocks from working with them or anything you've seen kind of return to the UK market that you found pretty interesting lately?
So I think there's lots of space to kind of play in there, right?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of thinking about how you kind of profile and target the kind of customers for the sake of sales, there's a lot of space to kind of evolve propositions there. But in terms of where it actually came from originally, so I was working, and this is how I ended up in the insurance sector, really. I took a new business job for a company called Trygg Forsikring, and it literally means a safe insurance in Danish, actually, and if you translate that to English. And they're the largest general insurer across the Scandinavian region now. And I actually started out in telematics and looking at sort of behavioral driver data and creating products in that space. So cool. I mean, obvious things are things like you brake too hard, you drive too fast, and then you're of course a higher risk. So you modify your behavior by you see those notifications on your mobile phone or whatever, and you modify your driving to comply with a kind of more safe way to drive, and then you get a better insurance premium which corresponds with that. Well, I then looked at other kind of propositions, essentially taking that model and then applying it to real estate, and then also then applying it to healthcare.
That's really cool.
And it's and essentially, if you sort of boil it down to kind of basic mechanics, it's a case of taking your existing underwriting model and then just identifying what the behavioural drivers are and what those triggers are, and then adding that in to the existing model. So like if you think about something like a sensor in if it's telematics or if it's just monitoring your plumbing in your house in the basement, because you don't want the taps the pipes to drip and have a leak in your basement or whatever. You don't actually. There's only a certain amount of data that you actually need, right, to identify what the behavioural kind of trigger is, and what the risk profile of that particular kind of responses, actually. And that's really where it gets interesting, because I think if you look at generally particularly across the technology industry, there's a kind of hype cycles, isn't there? Right? At the moment it's generative AI, and some years ago it was IoT.
IoT, blockchain. What else was it?
Web3 for a
APIs.
while.
I was eating off of one article about APIs for a while. I feel like that was keeping me busy. No, it is really interesting. So you'd mentioned the phone. I have a friend, Mike Simons. It's funny. This will be 2 podcasts in a row that his name comes up. But he would talk about how Progressive tried with the plugs in the car, but once it could be done on your phone, it was like an unlock. Once it was more natural. John Hancock has Vitality, where you have to have the watch, and life insurance guys are scared to sell it because then you just become like watch mechanics, and like people are calling you about their Apple Watch. I think the closer you can get to like natural things that are around us, things that are in our home, less work to do, those things are gonna be so valuable. Did you mention back in Norway there were even like things to do for your real estate to stay in compliance for insurance? There were different like devices you needed to use, or I feel like I might be projecting something, but
no, you're quite right. So the market is totally different. So there is. So I worked on a proposition to look at essentially taking the kind of telematics concept and applying that to installing IoT within housing kind of blocks of apartments.
Oh wow!
Because most people live in blocks of apartments over there. So rather than their own homes, but essentially a direct-to-consumer based proposition. And the reason there's a business case for it over there in a way that there wouldn't be in the UK is that there's such high levels of compliance in real estate. Like, it's insanely expensive to do even the most basic things. Let's say you have a new kind of a unit installed in your home, like some kind of whiteware or something like that. And you need to change the plug on something. You can literally invalidate your insurance policy if you don't hire an electrician to do that, right? So it's and that's quite expensive, actually. So and there's also a lot of liability built into their legal system as well, personal liability.
Oh wow,
so you're really motivated You're really motivated to avoid a claim. So you see, like we had this customer research where we found that our customers were actually taking pictures of their houses and their cabins when they had too much snow on the roof to demonstrate that they had cleared the snow off the roof. So because otherwise, if they don't clear the snow off, then they risk invalidating the insurance policy, right? And then if they have damage, obviously they're not going to pay out. So there's loads of sort of behaviours in there that you just sort of tap into, which make that cost-wise, it starts to be quite cost-efficient. Because what, of course, the insurers don't want to do, or any carrier really, is add to the customer acquisition cost. Really, do you? You're probably paying on marketing and broker fees, all those other things. So to add additional hardware costs on top of that is not very palatable, but it actually does make financial sense in some of these markets.
It's so cool how insurance is like this weird little thing that fits whatever it needs to and evolves over time to protect it. Because what I'm thinking there is every risk is almost like a 3 or 5 car pileup. Everything's kind of catastrophic. You have a fire in one unit, if all the units are connected, like we can't pay out for 10 apartments, so that they seem a little extra tight, which totally makes sense and fits that market. That's really cool. And then before we hit record, we were talking about just getting back in stride. I had COVID in July, and I'll post this end of January, early February. I don't think it's too silly to mention. Did dry January. Been going to yoga classes with my wife. Finally getting back in rhythm. It took me months. I know HealthTech kind of tracking, planning. I know you're on your own journey back to kind of full health and a full head of steam. What are you taking from kind of auto and real estate experience? What are you seeing potentially in healthcare as a way we can kind of track and be better through data?
Well, there's several areas actually. I've worked on a number of healthcare-based startup projects and propositions that sort of tailor into this space. So, there's some really kind of key areas. I worked on developing a proposition called Medit, which was essentially an attempt to digitize the value chain and cut down the administration between the insurance carriers, intermediary services, and the clinics and patients, essentially in that whole kind of value chain and user journey. So And I've worked on also a number of other propositions which sort of tailor and tap into this sort of space. So if we're taking a use case like physical therapy,
Yeah.
and you're thinking about things like cutting down injury time, right? And preventing injuries as well. So there's some key things like prehab, so being able to
Okay.
like have a way to manage and
Yeah.
kind of prepare yourself for your treatment, making sure you comply with the treatment.
Okay.
That's a major one actually. If you think about it, as soon as the injury stops hurting, what do? You stop taking the training and the treatment, don't you?
I got a
And
story for you
actually,
around that too. Oh yeah. Or my dad had shoulder surgery. My wife's a physical therapist. Sorry to jump in.
yeah.
And I don't think he's doing his training right. So he's supposed to like do a pulley thing, and he says he does
Yeah.
it twice until it's excruciating. And my wife's like, "That's not how it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to be like 10 or 20 light ones, like gentle, just a little further, not like painful." So he's like torturing himself, but she's like, "No, just a little bit every day." And but if there's some IoT device, if there's something that the PT could send home to him that has like a little measurement inside the pulley, I don't know, it's just interesting, or even on his phone, instead of a piece of paper, there could be some sort of dictatorial, process. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing is, if it's complying with the treatment in the
Mm.
appropriate way, isn't it?
Yeah.
And having some kind of feedback loop which helps you manage that yourself and monitor, and helps the treatment professional also monitor that with you. So, because being able to comply with the treatment
Hmm.
correctly, being able to follow the treatment plan, being able to complete the treatment plan and
Hmm.
take preventative treatment, those are all the things that are going to prevent reoccurrence, aren't they? And help you get better faster. And there's some
Yeah.
quite impressive stats actually there. But one of the challenges is all of the interoperability
Okay.
and also the kind of the nature of tailoring.
Hmm.
And I think from the projects that I've worked on, I would say it is solvable actually, and it doesn't have to be complicated technology. We don't need lots of fancy IoT
Yeah.
devices necessarily,
Probably
where they're
this.
appropriate, of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the whole part, a lot of the problem with a lot of telemedicine is the kind of generic one size fits all, and and for the sake of getting really good results out of certain injury categories, if you were able to tailor
Hmm.
your services very highly to these specific injury categories, you can see pretty significant results. I mean, we saw probably in one of the pilot studies I've run we had a knee injury training device
Oh wow.
actually, and then you strap these sensors to your legs, and you have a tablet device, and you
Yeah.
follow the exercises on the tablet device, then you have regular check-ins with you. Well, that cut down, in our experience, it was around 50-60% of
Yeah.
in-person treatment hours.
That's cool.
But
That's
they've done
awesome.
other studies where it was nearly 75 to 80%. Well, that's huge,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. And
Well,
they had quite significant reductions in injury in terms of
it's huge.
actually time to recovery as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting space there, actually. There's a lot of potential there.
No, 100%. I apologize for getting excited jumping in. I think it's just building an intelligence and sort of teaching you to teach yourself, which is really cool. And I
Yeah.
often think like the internet sort of digitizes what's here and it sort of makes a digital
Mm.
connected version of what already existed. I think it does create new things, but for the most part, not really. Some people argue about NFTs, but that's a whole other weird conversation. Um,
Totally.
I have a friend who works at like a med device fabrication shop. So if I'm a doctor or surgeon and I have this patentable product, but it's not up to production scale yet, they have a clean facility in Orange County and they'll make 1,000 of these or 100 of these. So they do the pre, help them go through compliance or whatever. They're like a dev shop, but for physical
Mm.
medical devices. It's gonna be cool. Maybe there'll be a digital dev shop one day for, IoT, intelligent smartphone, med device, med training and PT, related devices. It's really cool. I could totally see something for that. And yeah, my wife's a physical therapist. I'll talk about that on Twitter and everything else. She, passed recently, passed school, passed her boards. That sounded bad.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think more intelligent, everyone's doing their best, but sending people home, and I'm not sure this is what she does specifically, but sending people home with two pieces of white paper, as much as I love my printer, I don't know if that's the best.
The best approach, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. the way I cook for recipes probably shouldn't be the same way for, rehabbing, mobility that I hope to have for 60 years. That's super interesting. That's really cool.
Well,
Um,
I was thinking that the other thing actually post-pandemic as well, if we think about it, is just the number of treatment professionals,
yeah.
and the amount of pressure on services, the number of
Hmm.
people who've fallen out of the profession. I mean, over here in the UK right now, I mean, it's weeks actually just to get a private
Mm.
appointment online, not even in person, like
Oh,
online, right? So I mean, anything which kind of means you can
yeah.
get an improved result and also increases that access to treatment in that way. I mean, surely it's got to be a positive thing, right?
I want to like kind of sneak over to talk about insurance for a second and then maybe wrap up talking about building projects just around the world, like during the pandemic and how maybe it changed. Um, it's interesting with even insurance, they talk about a brain drain, a lot of people are retiring. I'm like, where are all these people to backfill these things? You know, um, I think the human eye is always going to need to be there. Not always, but going to be there to check people out, make sure they're okay, send them home. That's what my wife does at a hospital. Maybe do a final review on an insurance policy. But the automation to grab the data, to prep, and to kind of give us options is pretty cool. And I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of that the next, 3 to 5 years. Um, so pre-pandemic, I helped a startup in LA. I would drive up there for startup events. I was actually talking to Fineo above before the pandemic to help them come to the US because they need somebody licensed down here. We utilize Zoom. Nick Lamprella got me recording Zooms, but I don't think I could have networked the same way with like Insurtech runners, or even during the pandemic, we got some like CEOs together. I got younger agent friends. We call it like young guns and, insurance. All these guys and gals are great, and it was awesome. But I don't think I could have got half dozen to a dozen people lock in on a Zoom just on a Thursday without the pandemic. How were you networking before? Did you see like a kind of, I don't want to say height of global networking during, and is it changed now how you do your personal fractional CTO practice? What's been your experience over the past couple of years of doing this? Yeah.
So I think it has changed quite a lot
Yeah.
because I mean during the pandemic, yeah, you're totally right. I thought that was spot on, and suddenly everybody was online.
Yeah.
Everybody's focus was digital, and how do I find in new ways to actually engage with people? In a way, that was quite democratizing. Actually,
Hmm.
you suddenly had access to people that might not have otherwise bothered to engage
Hmm.
with you in that way. So, and that way, that was very positive, I think. But I mean, for me, I was stuck in a small town, relatively a big town for Norway, but
That's
a
cool.
small town in terms of kind of geographic sizes on the west coast, and right, there's only a limited kind of function in terms of how much you
Yeah.
can network from there, really. So I was having to think more broadly and focus on digital channels to start with, anyway. And I think in terms of being a sort of consultant CTO, I mean, a lot of your work does come via your network, and it's a
Yeah.
case of being active and connecting with investors and kind of I do a lot of mentoring and advisory
Cool.
work. I've been quite actively involved with a couple of accelerators, Techstars more recently,
Nice.
but also with Startup Norway. I've just finished
Yeah.
a investor training with them with their Angel
That's
Challenge
awesome.
program, which is very, very cool.
Heck yeah.
Um, so those sorts of kind of functions, I guess, kind of are like a platform
Hmm.
or a way to kind of facilitate kind of connecting with other people and connecting with other networks that might not, they're not kind of formal. Then you're not going to find them via LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been a lot of my function of trying to facilitate kind of whether it's professional engagements or just knowledge sharing
Yeah.
or connecting with people more generally for the sake of business.
It,
It's always a positive thing to get that kind of information
oh
exchange
yeah.
and feedback and learn from people. So.
No, it's so cool. There's a couple small things. It's so weird, but like physically, I'm like 6'4", trying to be less than 230. I'm a very big guy. You talk about the democratization of things. I think it's really cool how everyone's the same size on Zoom. It's a funny thing to mention, but I do think it's sort of flattened things out a little bit in a good way. I think that's really helpful. I think this feeling as legitimate as, coffee or lunch. I mean, obviously it's so great to get to meet up in person, but it was really cool how it kind of substantiated the Zooms, I'll say as well, and like you said, it extends our reach, extends all of our reach. And I think we're gonna be way better off because of it, kind of get and talk globally, find best practices. You get to help a company in the States, they get to have your knowledge share from your experiences in Norway, UK, and everywhere else. I think it's so cool. I'm excited for, the fact that we get a good amount more years of kind of playing this game and working on all this stuff. Um, but yeah, no, thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for hanging out with Insurtech runners and, being a fun friend on Twitter as well. And, making this feel a little bit less like work and a little bit more interesting and like play, while we're in all these projects. It's a good time. But
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been great to talk to you today.
yeah, of course. And if anybody should find you, maybe on Twitter, I think, LinkedIn, or what would be the best way to
Yeah.
reach out potentially if they're, around Insurtech and want to talk shop a little?
Oh, well, you're absolutely welcome to drop me a line by Twitter or by LinkedIn. You can find my profile, and yeah,
Perfect.
I'm always happy just to connect with people and share knowledge and learn whatever I can and offer back whatever I can, I guess. So,
That's awesome. I'll fill the profiles and notes too. But thank you everybody for joining us today, and keep up that digital cross-border networking. It's awesome stuff. Talk to you later.